Hello, my name is Michelle. Today I will be reviewing an article on birth defects and cancer. Are children with birth defects at higher risk of childhood cancers? Children born with defects can influence the risk of developing cancer through many ways. Both birth defects and childhood cancers are very rare. A birth cohort study has been implemented on children born in Texas between January 1996 to December 2005. Children who were identified with or without defects made up the two comparison groups in the birth cohort. Children who were born with birth defects were identified through the Texas Birth Defects Registry, which is an active surveillance system. Cases were defined as infant fetus with physical and chromosomal abnormality. The Texas Birth Defects Registry included all cases of birth defects diagnosed by a physician and were recorded in the medical records. Information from medical records underwent extensive checks through a web-based system which is reviewed by geneticists of about 60% of registry records. Texas Birth Defects Registry began in South Texas as well as Houston area. By 1999, it expanded and eventually covered the whole state. The 6-digit system was used to code birth defects. A diagnostic certainty was assigned to each birth defect. About 96.7% were definite and 3.3% were possible. Live births, pregnancy terminations, and spontaneous fetal deaths were included. Birth certificates were linked with registry cases by matching by a variety of combinations of each identifier, such as names, date of birth, and so on. Those that were not matched were subjected to clerical review for matching. About 96.2% cases were linked to a birth certificate. During the study, 115,686 children were identified in the Texas Birth Defects Registry having one or more diagnosed birth defects and applied to the birth defects comparison group. All children had a birth certificate. Those birth defects were grouped into different categories that were routinely presented by the registry annual reports and the CDC. Those who were not registered with the Texas Birth Defects Registry or were possible were placed in the non-birth defects comparison group in the cohort. The Texas Cancer Registry required a high-quality standards by the CDC. The registry was gold certified by North American Association of Central Cancer Registries. Texas Cancer Registry consisted of those who were diagnosed with cancer between the years of 1996 and 2005. Children who had cancer before the age of 15 were identified with the link of birth certificate data with the Texas Cancer Registry database. CDC has developed a software called Link Plus version 2.0, which was used for the link between the Texas Cancer Registry and birth certificate data. The software matched records using probabilistic and deterministic methods. The linkage consisted of all records that were matched by infants' first and last name, date of birth, and gender. As far as the results, about 3.6% of children in the birth cohort were identified as having one or more birth defects. There was a slight increase in males with birth defects than females, and mothers who were over 35 years of age at the time during the child's birth also showed an increase. Children with birth defects were smaller than those without birth defects. There was a total of 2,351 cases of cancer identified in the birth cohort, and 239 cases have had one or more birth defects. Children with birth defects had a threefold increased risk of developing cancer when they were compared to those without birth defects. ICCC3 cancer group had one child with birth defects and were statistically elevated risk ratios for leukemia, retinoblastoma, soft tissue sarcomas, and germ cell tumors. Association between birth defects and total childhood cancers by age were among children who were diagnosed with cancer before the age of 1. Common childhood cancers consisted of mostly leukemia. Leukemia accounted for most of the childhood cancers among the different birth defects. 50% of children with cardiac and circulatory defects were diagnosed with leukemia. There was only 5 children who was diagnosed with cancer who had respiratory defects, and 4 out of the 5 were diagnosed with leukemia. The next common cancers were of the central nervous system, neoplasms, and neuroblastoma among children with birth defects. This research showed that children with birth defects had an increased risk for developing cancer when compared to those without birth defects. The most common cancers they are at risk were leukemia, retinoblastomas, soft tissue sarcomas, and germ cell tumors. Children with birth defects under the first year of age were also at higher risk of cancer than older children. Studies have been conducted earlier that have found that children with birth defects have had an increased risk of cancer development, and all were confirmed showed a strong association between Down syndrome and leukemia. There was a series of studies conducted from the Children's Oncology Group which investigated whether cancers such as leukemia developed from environmental exposures and those who did not have Down syndrome. The study didn't confirm any association with medical tests, irradiation, maternal health conditions during pregnancy, congenital abnormalities or respiratory history factors, and infertility treatment. They have found that household chemical exposures have had something to do with the development of cancer. With the addition of children with chromosomal defects, there was an overall increased risk of leukemia among children with birth defects. Children who had cardiac and circulatory defects, the group that had the most total cancer diagnosis, showed that leukemia was the most common cancer. There was a risk of retinoblastoma ranging from a 2-fold to a 15-fold increase on the study of birth defects and childhood cancers. The study has also found that various types of birth defects were found in retinoblastoma cases. There was a 2.5-fold increased risk of germ cell tumors for those who were male with congenital abnormalities, with risk increasing for children who had multiple abnormalities. These were due to cytotritism, which is an undescended testicle. They also had an increased risk of extragonadal germ cell tumor, which was associated with those who had mental retardation, congenital heart defects, as well as skeletal defects. Data was derived from high-quality population-based registries from birth defects and cancers, which made the study strong. The study had access to a large number of childhood cancer cases for analysis. Studies had about 55 or fewer total cancers among the birth defect group, which restricted their ability to look into relations among less common cancers and birth defects. There was also a limitation to the study was the lack of death certificates linking to the study cohort to allow to adjust a person-year contributions for children who have passed before the study ended. The maximum time for follow-up was 10 years. Those cancers that formed commonly in late childhood would be underrepresented in the data. There was some minor structural birth defects, such as septal defects that go undiagnosed in healthy children but may likely be diagnosed in children with serious illnesses, such as cancer. Birth defect diagnoses were accepted by the Texas Birth Defects Registry and only up to the first year of the child's birth, but they were able to evaluate the potential impact of septal defects that were diagnosed only as a result of cancer by excluding cases whose cancer diagnosed before the age of 1. It was possible that birth defects can increase the risk of childhood cancers. Cancer can predispose a child to developing a birth defect, and/or birth defects and cancers occur concurrently through a set of common underlying factors. The analysis showed that the wide range of birth defects were related to a wide range of cancers. This may indicate mutations in developmental genes during embryogenesis that may lead to tissue mosaicism, so that the range of tissues that were involved in mosaicism may have been a predictive type of cancer, birth defect, or even both. The study also discovered that there was a high risk for solid tumors among children with birth defects than those for leukemia and lymphomas. This indicated that these tumors may be related to mutations that were developed early in comparison to mutations later in development when cells are forming blood and the lymphatic system. The study also showed that cancer development was also involved with the developmental genes that have a role in body formation during embryogenesis. There were over 3 million births in the state of Texas during 1996 to 2005, and about 4% of those births have had at least one birth defect. Of all the children, about 0.08 have developed cancer during the 10-year study period. Researchers have concluded that children born with birth defects were 3 times likely to develop childhood cancer than those born without birth defects. Common cancers were leukemia, eye and soft tissue cancers, and cancers of the ovaries and testes in children with birth defects, excluding musculoskeletal defects. While researchers looked into the link between leukemia and Down syndrome, the association between birth defects and other cancers developed in childhood still remain. There were the same results and the same pattern. They also have discovered that there is a connection between birth defects and brain tumors. Currently, there are no prevention techniques that exist for childhood cancers, nor are there any screenings, but a child's genetics and environment plays a big role along how the internal organs are structured, or differences in lifestyle in children who were or weren't born with defects. I thought this article was very interesting. The research provides clues and genetic links for childhood cancer, which can also lead to a new and better therapies. Thank you.